Book 101 is all about the books that I read for the last 40 years. And today I have my special guest. He's a keynote speaker, leadership trainer, and of course, executive coach. No other than Dr. Andy Neillie.
Well, glad to join you, Daniel. Thanks for having me on. As one book lover to another, I'm excited to learn from you and share with you some books that have been formative in both of our leadership development paths.
Welcome to Book 101, Mr. Andy, and can you please introduce more about yourself?
Sure, I've been passionate about answering the question, what makes a good leader for more than 25 years now. Daniel, like a lot of us, I just had a bad boss early on in my career. I had a couple of bad bosses, and uh, and my Christian faith became important to me at an early young age. I'm reading the biography of this great servant leader, and then I'm going to work for a boss that had anger management issues, and this was on a construction job site. And if he had a hand tool in his hand when he lost control of his temper, the rest of the workers better watch out. And I just knew there was a disconnect there, and it started me on a quest. What separates simply somebody who's in a management position from a high performing leader? And that's really been my journey for the last 25 years plus now.
Dr. Andy Neillie, thank you so much for empowering people of the world. So, how does being a great leader mean to you personally?
Well, I've traveled around the globe for 25 years. I've got 5 million frequent flyer miles working with leaders of Fortune 500s and local small businesses and everything in between. Not every manager is a good leader. I think there's four things, Daniel, that begin to define somebody who's emerging as a high performing leader. And so I call them my four leadership necessities. First of all, are you a person of conviction who has passion, sees the bigger picture, has a strategic mindset? Are you a person of conviction? Secondly, the whole area of competence. Are you helping your team execute better and better? Are you helping your team do their job better and better? The third leadership necessity I see top performing leaders engaging in really is that one that you and I could probably talk with your listeners for quite a while. And that's that piece of character. You'll never be a better leader than you are a person. Fair-minded, honest, other-oriented, selfless. Are you about them and not you? The character of a leader. And then the last element that really came together in my review of good leaders, just even in the last 4 or 5 years, Daniel, is folks like you that are becoming high performing leaders and not just managers. You live by an unspoken covenant. Covenant is kind of an old fashioned word here in the States where I'm at, but what a covenant is, it's both a formal arrangement and a personal arrangement. Marriage covenant here in the state of Texas where I live. Love and affection in riches and in poor, for better and for worse. The whole romantic side. There's also a legal document that's signed by an officiant and recorded with the county clerk. There's both a formal and a personal side to that covenant. And when I was looking at managers that really were strong leaders, I recognized they push their team, they drive, they have formal criteria. Oh, and by the way, Daniel had a team member who needed an extra 3 weeks off because they were dealing with a parent who had cancer. And it went beyond the HR policies, but it was the right thing to do. So Daniel made it work for his team member, both the personal and the professional side. And I realized that's the final agreement: conviction, competence, character, and covenant. And if you and I are working on growing in those areas, I think you'll look a lot like the best leaders I've worked with for the last 25 years. You're becoming a high performing leader.
Beautifully articulated, Dr. Andy. Very well said. So, can leadership be taught or it is something you're born with?
Yeah, great question. I think there are some people that are naturally more wired this way. The high energy, outgoing, I'm not afraid to be in front. But here's the thing I want to tell a bunch of people like me who are not naturally extroverts is leadership can grow. you and I can make the decisions to think more strategically. We can work on our competence so that we can help our team members get better. We can work on our own rich character. We can engage in the things that transition us into becoming more of a high performing leader. I suspect, Daniel, there are some people who have a bit of a leg up, but I would say I was one of those that I'm not sure leadership was in my genetic makeup when I was very young. I just started asking hard questions and it emerged along the way.
So, Dr. Andy, how do you develop confidence as a leader?
Yeah. There's that old adage, how do you get experience? By making bad mistakes. And the way you make right decisions is through learning through bad decisions. And I would say the same thing. One of the lessons many of the leaders I work with have to learn is how to hold a hard conversation. And the only way I think you learn to do a hard conversation well is by doing it poorly at first. So leaders remain students. They open themselves to growing and changing, and over time that makes them better and better as a leader. You never fully arrive. Leadership is more of a comma than it is a period, if you think about it. But we can all grow as we make mistakes and learn from those mistakes, and be humble about it and try to push forward.
What's the biggest mistake new leaders often make?
I think it's one of two extremes. The first one is I want to be everybody's buddy. And so we're just going to be friends and I'm going to make you feel great about your job. And if you're in a position of leadership, part of the reason you're there is you're expected to drive performance. So I think the one extreme is when you just want to be everybody's friend. I think conversely, on the other end, it's where you disregard the people and you just push for the outcome. And people resign, people move on, people leave because they don't want to work for you. You and I can't fall off either side of that extreme, I think.
Certainly. Totally agree, Dr. Andy. So, what is important is emotional intelligence in leadership.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that whole EQ is probably
Mm.
more important, Daniel, than IQ if you're going to be an effective leader. Can you read the tea leaves, so to speak? Do you understand body language? And the wonderful, interesting thing is the animal kingdom can teach us a great deal about that because pets can't speak, but they communicate a great deal with their owners through eye contact and through head nods and through body language. And I think if you and I are going to be good leaders, we learn to read those cues. We develop our emotional intelligence, as you indicated.
So, Dr. Andy, can you give us five leaders that you emulate?
Well, first and foremost, it would be Jesus Christ, the greatest servant leader of all time. The interesting
Certainly.
thing, Daniel, is I'm one of probably 20,000 or more leadership consultants globally that are trying to raise the bar inside organizations. Once you get past the first century in the Western world, none of us have anything new to say. Jesus Christ and Marcus Aurelius and everything else is really repetition and layering on. But those couple of folks, John Maxwell, I think the American Management Association says he is written more about leadership than anybody else in the history of mankind. I'm a huge fan of Patrick Lencioni, who has a consulting group in Boston, Massachusetts, in the U.S., and has written some wonderful books about team building and team leadership. And then I will simply brag on the best boss I ever worked for, Bill Yarger, who taught me more about leading and managing early on in my career than anybody else.
Definitely, Jesus Christ is number one, people. Totally agree, Dr. Andy. So, how do you handle criticism or failure as a leader?
Yeah, yeah. Well, Patrick Lencioni, who I mentioned a minute ago, wrote a book probably 7 or 8 years ago called The Ideal Team Player. Excuse me, The Ideal Team Player. Wonderful book. I actually think he mistitled it. It shouldn't be The Ideal Team Player. It should be titled The Ideal Team Leader. And in that book, he identified three characteristics: humble, hungry, and smart. And I think when leaders bring humble, hungry, and smart to their leadership positions, they're beginning to emerge as a high performing leader. Are you humble? You don't make it about you. You recognize leaders are at the bottom of the pyramid, not at the top of the pyramid. Are you hungry? You want your team to perform. There's outcomes you're pushing to. And are you smart? And Daniel, this brings us back to your point from a minute ago. Smart not in IQ, but smart in EQ. Do you know how to read the room? Are you aware of your people? Are you aware of your client? Are you aware of the dynamic? Humble, hungry, and smart, I think, is pretty profound approach to good leadership.
Again, Dr. Andy, very well said. Totally agree for what you are talking about. I think nowadays our leaders are so boastful. They
Yeah,
are not humble enough to be a leader.
right.
So, how do
Exactly.
you motivate a team, especially during challenging times?
Yeah. Well, I think one of the things you just alluded to is it's not about boastful leadership. It's about rolling up your sleeves and getting in the trenches with them, being on their side of the table, not lording it over them, but working alongside them. Now, Daniel, you and I have to be realistic about that. If you're the CEO of an organization, while you should be willing to empty the trash and mop the floors, you have other things that need to be done that only you can do. So you don't have to do everything that they need to do in order to keep the business moving forward. But they need to know that you'd be willing to if you needed to, and you understand how important their role is. So it's that recognition that we all have an important role to play, and my job is to equip you to do your job to the best of your ability. There,
Totally, yes. So, can you
yeah.
share a time when you had to make a tough leadership decision?
Uh, well, as recently as about 6 weeks ago, in addition to the leadership consulting, training, and coaching I do internationally, my wife and I own some local businesses here in Central Texas. I have a management team of 7 managers that report directly to me. We've got about 175 people out in the field, and I have weekly calls with my managers and touch bases and a team meeting. And I made the difficult decision to let one of my managers go who had been with us for 12 years, about a month and a half ago now. Um, Very hard decision. The toxic personality that kept getting in the way of the effectiveness just got too expensive. But the reality of it is, leaving a hole where that senior manager was asked to step down has meant everybody else has had to step up a bit. Tough decision. I stand by that decision, but it was not an easy decision to come to. The expense was greater keeping this person in their position, but there's still an expense now that this position is vacant.
Totally. So, what role does communication play in effective leadership?
Yeah. Well, such a great question, such a great insight. Um, I think no matter what position of leadership you're in, whether you're a frontline manager or in the C suite or in a board, if you have a team of people underneath you, part of your job description is CCO. You are, by very nature, Chief Communication Officer. You're the one that leads the meetings. You're the ones that issues the edict. You're the one that expects people to cooperate together. And Daniel, in fact, I take a bit of a divergent stand. If you and I were to poke around LinkedIn very often, there's a whole lot of people that say death to the meetings, no meetings. The fewer the meetings, the better. And on the one hand, I understand. On the other hand, as a leader, you and I, we do our work in meetings. And our job as chief communication officer, we set vision, we offer correction, we hold people accountable. Those things happen in meetings. And therefore, communication is vital to effective leadership. Chief communication officer is part of your title as soon as you have a team underneath you.
What would you build trust with your team or organization?
Yeah. Here's the problem with trust. Trust deposits, by their very nature, are small. You need to make a lot of small trust deposits along the way, because trust withdrawals are typically large. And unless you've got a bank account of trust deposits to bank against, trust will be violated. Trust is should be sacred to a leader. And recognize I've got to make sure that I'm doing everything in my power to be viewed as trustworthy by the team members I want to influence. Really, you kind of get me up on my soapbox here, Daniel, because one of my problems with the world we live in the 2020s is people mistake celebrity influencers who amass 10,000 followers on TikTok for true leaders. There's no trust in that celebrity influencer. They're simply trying to gain eyeballs. If you and I are truly good leaders, people trust us to go hard directions, to do the hard thing, to take the extra mile because they know we are watching out for them. Our commitment is to helping them succeed. Trust is the very currency of effective leadership.
Yes, indeed, Miss Dr. Andy. So, what advice do you have for leading people with different personalities and backgrounds?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I think the first thing you and I have to recognize is style is different than performance. And while I live in the US and Texas and we all have certain presuppositions about Texans, I need to recognize when I'm in Australia or when I'm in Singapore or when I'm in London or when I'm in Paris, their performance looks different than a Texan, but I'm not measuring their style. I'm measuring their performance. Another example, I'm a relatively quiet introvert. I think a lot. I write a lot. I speak on podcasts. I'm not the life of the party. I've got a couple of managers who are. They're different than me. I
Yes.
need to enjoy their strengths and let them benefit from my strengths and not focus on the weaknesses. Don't confuse style with performance.
So, how do you balance being authoritative with being approachable?
Wow. Boy, you're asking some great questions. I think if you and I could answer that, we could write the million copy bestseller. There's always there's
Yes.
always a tension, right? One of my
Yes.
graduate school professors, he said, Andy, it's dynamic equilibrium. Static equilibrium, it's a bowl and a marble, and it doesn't take too much work to keep the marble in the bottom of the bowl. Dynamic equilibrium is when you turn the bowl upside down. And at times you've got to be authoritative, and at times you've got to be accommodating, and you've got to balance between the two, and you never quite get it right. That's why leadership is always a journey. You never arrive as a leader because you're always learning, how can I do that a little bit better? It's a tough challenge. Your responsibility is to work at balancing both approachability with authoritativeness.
Yes, I hope our leaders today learning something of what they're
Yeah,
doing
yeah,
and they will adjust. So, how do you continue to grow and evolve as a leader?
yeah. Well, you listen to Daniel Lucas's podcast and you read the books that he and his guests are recommending, and you be open yourself to learning. You engage in self-reflection. Your first job always as a leader is to lead yourself well. And so I call it my leader's hour. It's not a full 60 minutes, but on my best days, I spend time in the morning with spiritual disciplines and physical disciplines and mental disciplines, preparing myself to have an effective day and week and month. You've got to hold up the mirror as a leader. Can't hold it up too long. We're not allowed to become self-centered and narcissistic, but we've got to look at ourselves first and ask those hard questions about character and competence and covenant and conviction.
Dr. Andy, what will be your advice for those people out there who want to be a leader or great leader?
Well, first of all, don't aspire to be a great leader. Aspire to be in a position where you can make great things happen. And if you're making great things happen and people around you are growing as a result of that, they're going to recognize you're a great leader. Your job is not to be a great leader. Your job is to make other people great at what they do. And if you are investing in other people, you'll be recognized for your leadership.
Dr. Andy, thank you so much for your advice. So, what would be your short term and long term goals as a keynote speaker, leadership trainer, and of course, an executive coach?
Yeah. My short-term goals would be to continue to be disciplined myself, to meet with people like you and others, to spread the word about effective leadership, to recognize leadership matters. This soft skill that they label as a soft skill is one of the hardest skills of all, because we're asking people to put death to their own ego and make other people better. So my short-term goal is, Andy, are you being diligent in that leader's hour that you alluded to in the morning, to make sure you use your time well and you use your influence well? Longer term, if I could have a vision, Daniel, it would be that the people who resonate with Dr. Andy's voice, and I don't have anything new to say on leadership, I just say it with my own vocabulary, that those people end up leaving their worlds better for the time they've thought about how to be an effective leader.
So, what one's leadership lesson you learn the hard way? And good luck to your goals, Dr. Andy.
I think I think one of the leadership lessons I learned the hard way, I alluded to a few minutes ago. I was too concerned early in my career with being nice rather than being firm, and I got taken advantage of. One of the very early people that worked for me played me like a fiddle, and when she finally left the organization, I had some of my other team members come to me as their manager and say, "Well, it took you long enough to figure out she needed to go," because I was letting her get away with stuff because I was trying to be a nice boss. For me, I've had to toughen up a bit, and I think, Daniel, I'm not sure anybody can learn that lesson from a book. I think that's the type
Yes,
of lesson you learn by experience. Do that once or
sure.
twice or three times, and pretty soon you start to realize this is not working for any of us.
Money can buy books, but not wisdom, people.
Uh, well put.
Yes,
Well put.
yes.
Yeah.
So, how can leaders foster innovation and creativity within their teams?
Well, first and foremost, you got to give your people permission to fail, because part of
Failure.
the flip side of innovation is, I'm going to try something that may not work. We read in the Harvard Business Review and in professional publications all these wonderful stories of the companies that went 100x in their first 90 days. What we don't read about are the other 99 companies that had to restart and restart and restart. You've got to give your people permission to fail. And in fact, celebrate their mistakes, because we learned what we don't want to do next time. And just make sure that
True.
you protect your enterprise well enough that it can suffer the financial losses or the client losses of those mistakes.
Yes, and Dr. Andy, I think people nowadays afraid to commit mistakes.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, I think
Peop
so. Part of the problem is everything is so visible. We live in a totally social media saturated, where I feel like every decision we make, every step we take can be captured on video and broadcast. Some of the
yes.
best leadership lessons I ever learned were being caught in my mistakes and being called out for those mistakes.
So, Dr. Andy, what role does integrity play in long-term leadership success?
Yeah. I mean, it's vital. And let's remember what integrity is. Integrity is not perfection. It's simply being who you say you were going to be. I am very aware of my weaknesses as well as my strengths. And I think any good leader needs to be honest about their weaknesses as well as their strengths. And if they're in a healthy organization, part of what they do is they pull people around them to complement their weaknesses, to fill in where they don't have the strength. So I think integrity is simply being honest with who you are in front of your people. That doesn't mean you're fully transparent and vulnerable. There are leadership decisions you and I have to make that are hard decisions that our team members may never understand, but we don't lie to them. We are inwardly and outwardly the same. That's what integrity means.
Dr. Andy, in line of our discussion for today or tonight, can you recommend a book regarding this topic?
Uh, you and I talked about this at the right before you turned the camera on. There's so many good books. There's thousands of books on leadership that are written every year. A couple of the seminal books, foundational books for me, The Work of Leaders, which is a book by Julie Straw and a number of other people. It's kind of a meta study of what makes a good leader. And I learned a great deal when I read that book. I think they examined 300 other books on leadership and research studies in addition to interviews around the globe on effective leadership teams. So the Work of Leaders. And then a book I already alluded to, The Ideal Team Player by Patrick Lencioni. And once again, I think he mislabeled the book. I think you and I would call that The Ideal Team Leader. So those would be two of the top 10 books that I would recommend for an emerging leader.
Yes, people, highly recommended. Please grab them and
Yes.
read them. Uh, and empower your leadership. So
Yeah.
before we wrap up our discussion today, Dr. Andy, I'm inviting you to please do listen to my other podcast, Law 101, in its first season, people, first season with Mr. Andy Samachuk. And please do listen to our latest episode. We are talking about Mr. Donald Trump global visa. So, Dr. Andy, what advice would you give to someone stepping into their first leadership role?
Be a listener rather than a teller at first. Learn from your people before you demand performance from your people as much as possible. Go on a listening tour rather than a telling tour your first 90 days of leadership.
Dr. Andy Neillie, thank you so much for being a great leader to your company. And I hope you will empower more and more and more through your speaking and to your coaching and to your training itself. And
Thank
I
you.
hope one day you will create a book that will empower people all over the world. So,
Yeah, I
Mr.
appreciate
Andy, can you
it.
please invite our listeners to support all you're doing right now as a
Yeah,
speaker, as a leadership trainer, or
yeah,
executive coach?
yeah. Well, and I'd love to have them follow me at Neely Leadership as the screen in front says somebody wants to grab 15 minutes with me. I'd be privileged to talk with them about their own leadership development.
Yes, people, let's support Dr. Andy Neillie because if you support him, we're empowering our generations to generation to come to be a great leader. So, Dr. Andy, thank you so much for your time.
My pleasure. Thank you, Daniel.
More to come, people. See you soon.